Hi, everyone. Welcome back. So today I'm going to be talking about composition because you guys asked about composition, and I thought about an interesting way to do this. I didn't want to create another article where I just go over the different types of composition. I figured it would make more sense to go over images that I have made and kind of talk through the way I approach composition in those images and the things that I looked for, and basically break down the different types of composition that I used in these images. Um, so I have three images that I'm going to be talking about today, and I'm going to be basically detailing. I think honestly the topic for today is going to be minimalism, right? And I chose minimalism because it's pretty much the foundation of my approach to composition. It's kind of like how it's the one thing that is pretty much constant in all my images is the minimalism aspect of composition. I do employ different aspects of it. Like I could use like leading lines or repetition or rule of thirds, but the one thing that is always consistent is the fact that I apply minimalism to everything. And when I say minimalism, I'm referring to the elimination of distractions and just having all the items that I feel complement the image in the image. And I'm very anal about the things I choose to include and the things I exclude from the images. So I'm going to start with this image. It's a very simple image. Well, visually simple because it is a minimalist image. So I posed a couple. I had them with trees behind them, a whole bunch of trees. And what was interesting about this image is the sun was setting, so there was this little beam of light. The setting sun, the really warm light that was on them, and I uh, I exposed for that light, as you can see, and exposed for the highlights of the light and made that image. Now I did not pull in post. I did not pull back shadows. So anything that was in the shot in the background um, kind of disappeared, into the shadows. But you could see the tree line that was formed behind them, and it had this. When I composed it, I had this whole yin yang thing image in my mind. How the image is split into half, and you have one color, the blue sky, and one on the top, and the dark trees on the bottom, and them right there in the middle, kind of popping out of the background, the trees. So that's kind of like how I approach this image with the minimalism in you know the minimalism and that whole yin yang idea. I do that a lot, or at least at some point in my career, I did that a lot in a lot of my images, splitting the image with two different textures, two different colors, and things like that, just to make it a little bit more interesting. Um, but as you can see, there are no other details in the image other than the two colors and the people, the subjects popping off the background. So that was one way, or this is one way to show how minimalism can be applied to an image, using highlights and shadows and kind of like letting things disappear into the shadows so they're not popping out there unnecessarily. So yeah, that's just one image. Okay. All right. So this is image number two. This is a more recent image that I made, actually during the whole COVID-19 period. So like a few weeks ago. Um, so this is another thing I like to do, and this is again to show minimalism, right? So in this image, you see there are about three things here that I look for in my compositions, or I try to include in my compositions. Um, and one of them is texture, right? You can clearly see the minimalism in that image because there is nothing else in the background besides the wood, the wooden floor, the slats on the floor. So this picture was taken at the pier but at the wharf in DC, and this is kind of like the area of the pier. And there are a lot of things going on in that scene. There are a bunch of chairs, and there's like a restaurant that was set up behind them, and there's all that going on. It's like really busy. People are hanging out, having fun. They're trying to do outdoor seating for restaurants, And I never like to include things that are distracting in my images. So for this one, something I often do is when I notice that there are distractions in my images, or sorry, distractions in the scene, I tend to look up or look down, because usually, you can get rid of things in your view by shooting up into the sky, because usually the sky is clear, it has nice skies, or you can shoot down to the ground, and if the ground is has an interesting texture, because the average ground doesn't look that good. But if you're in grass or by the water, or on a boardwalk where there's nice wooden floors, or a nice brick road, you can make the brick road or the floor the backdrop if you raise your camera high enough. So fortunately, there was a bench right by them, and I was able to get on that bench and really tilt my camera downwards, to make this image. I believe I was using my 20 millimeter lens, so I was able to focus downwards and make this image, and use they were backlit, so I was able to use some of that to make it a little bit more interesting. You can see the hairlights formed by the sun in the backdrop. You can see a little bit of the sun hitting the floor in the back. So initially, it was more of a silhouette that was made, but I exposed enough for it to get brighter, so I could get some detail in the in front, and I made the image. But again, the main thing in this image, I think what makes the image is it's not necessarily the fact that they were centered, right? That's symmetry. It's not necessarily for the fact that they were centered, and there are leading lines. You can see them, being done by the ground, the floor. But I think it was really the fact that it was a minimalist image, and there are no distractions and nothing competing with the client, with the subjects. But I think all three of those things, the fact that is, I'm using a wide angle lens, and there's some you can see a lot of the floor, and you can see those leading lines, and the light is interesting. I think yes, all of that combined together makes the image really interesting. But if this wasn't a minimalist photo, if there were distractions everywhere, it won't have the same effect that it does now. Um, so that's again is another example of the minimalism and the elimination of distractions. These are very distracting environments, but I really go out of my way to be able to take these images without random things in there that kind of take away your attention away from the couple. So, yes, that's photo number two, and that's the explanation on that one. So I'm going to bring up a third one. So this is another image, and I've shown this image at a few of the talks that I've given, presentations I've given at conferences, or wherever I have spoken. And this image I like because you shoot an image and it kind of informs how you approach things going forward, because that was the day you solved the problem, right? And when you solve that problem, if it wasn't something that was taught to you, but something you kind of discovered on your own, when you solve that problem, it kind of informs how you approach other problems going forward, similar problems. So this image was made in Alexandria, and it's at this is a fountain, and it's a very busy part of Alexandria. There are a lot of people running around, kids in the background. But because I like to use geometry in my images, and that informs how I make images, um, the fact that there were triangles, like if you were to move the couple from where they're sitting, you would notice that there are triangles, like the corners of the fountain form a triangle and leading lines. So I placed them there, and I wanted to show that have that those lines lead to them, but at the same time, I wanted to eliminate distractions because it was a really busy background, and I'm shooting with a wide angle lens, 20 millimeter lens, with maybe f4 or f2.8 or something, but you see everything. There's no I don't hide behind shallow depth of field when I make images. So because you see everything, I'm forced to really have only include the things that I want in these images in the image, and eliminate everything else that I don't, that really is a distraction. So again, I raise the camera up, and raising it up, I'm able to focus on the clean ground with these leading lines, and I have them placed in where their heads are. It's is lighter behind them, so there's no they pop off the background. So it's just everything leads right to them. There are no distractions in the image. So like I mentioned, a lot of my work is based off of elimination of distractions, having images that are clean and pretty, and when you look at them, you know exactly what's going on, you know exactly what the image is about, and you know exactly who the subjects are, because the composition informs that idea of who the subjects are. They're not clashing with people, they're not random things in the shot that take your attention away from them. You know exactly what it's about. It's almost like being in a studio and having a backdrop behind them, because backdrops are deliberate. You know exactly who the subject is. If it's a white backdrop, if it's a black backdrop, you know exactly who the subject is because they stand right off the background. You're not competing with random things behind them. So I try to find environments or create those spaces in real world environments where you get the natural textures of the environment, you get the natural colors of the environment, but they're not clashing with the subject. It's almost like it was designed right for the image, and that's by design, because I do design my images when I make them. So yeah, this is the first. I think this is going to be the first post of composition. I'm going to make several of them talking about the different ways I use composition. But in this particular image, not only is minimalism applied, you see leading lines, you see the textures that I mentioned, and you see symmetry. So with me, I am always applying multiple types of composition techniques into my one image. So I just don't create an image with rule of thirds and think I'm done. While I might create that image with rule of thirds, I'm also going to look about my minimalism and eliminating distractions, right? Not having things behind them that compete and look like, hands or trees are growing out of their heads and things like that. Not having any of that stuff. It's really about having that clean palette, but also, employing all the different types of composition, layering them into the image. And the more of them I can, use without, the more of them I can include in the image, the better the image looks. And that's pretty much it for this type of composition. I will, however, throw in a bonus image. Okay. All right. So here's the bonus image. I think this is a perfect example of the whole yin and yang thing I talk about. And I don't know why I started doing it. I just thought it was interesting. And sometimes I just look at images that I make as graphics or, visual art versus necessarily something that abstract art versus something that actually has to have a real meaning. I used at some point I used to look at it as just self-expression as an artist, expressing myself, expressing my creativity, how I feel like doing it. So with this particular image, this was taken at Meridian Park, and I'll literally break down how this image was made. So there are stairs, right? If you're familiar with Meridian Park in DC, there are stairs you walk up. You used to walk up to the top part of the park. So he's standing on the ground with me, and she's up. She's basically gone behind and taken several steps up to go up the stairs. And I just made sure they were standing in a place where I could have my shapes, my triangles, or my top triangle diagonals. And I had her stand there and him on one side. And I used a tilt shift lens to focus both their heads. They're on different focal planes, they're on different distances, different levels, but I was able to focus my lens to intersect with both their heads. And that's how this image was made. But again, despite the fact that I'm using, again, a clean canvas, clean backdrop, minimalist backdrop, I have them doing the yin and yang thing. I have triangles in my composition, shapes, geometry. I also have, it's almost like a rule of thirds, but the subjects are on equal ends of the thirds, but they're on some diagonal. I have, and I have the tilt shift effect, which is another layer of icing on the cake. But that's how this was created. And, you know, it's sometimes you just need to try things. I like to approach things graphically. So I'm sometimes I look at compositions and try something crazy, right? And just say, hey, you guys go stand here, you guys go stand there. And that's, I think, part of the creative process is being able to think of something bizarre and just trying to see if it actually does work versus going with what you know every time. It's okay to take risks when you have the time to take risks. And the more you take risks, the more you get comfortable with taking risks. So this to me was I don't know how I even envisioned it, but I really don't know. I was just like, oh, let me try this. And I tried it and it worked. Now, I might find myself in another scenario that's similar, but slightly different, that could produce a different type of image. But the foundation of that idea might have started here because I made this little experiment and it worked. So I think, my advice is to always experiment. You know, I might have tried this and it might have failed miserably, and I'm like, all right, cool, whatever, it didn't work. But the next time I'm going to try something else, and that might hit. So my advice is to always experiment, always try new things, try different things. Sometimes you're going to stumble on something amazing, and that works. So yeah, I hope this was helpful. I talked about minimalism, elimination of distractions, and that's a common theme. So even though next time I post, I might talk about something else, you might still notice that it's a minimalist image because that's just the foundation of my composition, is always approaching things with that minimalist mindset. And I think if you do that, you can't go wrong. All right. So I hope this was fun. I hope this was helpful. Stay tuned for my next post on other composition, ideas and methods, and I'll show how I use some of those things. But yeah, thanks for being a part of the group. I hope this was helpful, and I will continue to post more. And if you guys have any things you want to see, please feel free to comment in this video, ask questions, suggest certain images you might have seen that you want me to talk about. I will talk about them. I'm an open book, on this platform. So yeah, hope this was helpful. Hope this was fun. All right. Thank you. Bye.